Hi, and welcome to this video on how to use .NET and AL, even in the cloud. Hey, my name is Eric, and the history of Business Central / Nav and .NET goes a long way back. .NET used to be the secret sauce in the toolbox, so if for something that we could not accomplish within CAL or AL, we could turn to .NET. When Business Central went into the cloud, Microsoft cut off the access to .NET on the cloud from a totally valid security perspective, since Business Central is running as a multi-tenant installation, and you can break out of the sandbox, so to speak, from .NET, reflection and all that. Microsoft could not have us writing .NET code deployed on their servers. So we were back to square one, back to AL. There's been a couple of ways to get around this, and they all basically, the idea is that you host your .NET code in an Azure function or something like that, and then web service to it. In this video, I'm going to show you another way of doing this. So I'm actually running .NET inside Business Central, served off dynamics.com. And perhaps the best way of doing this is starting by let's demo, and then let me explain how this all fits together. Here is a very, very simple piece of C# code. This is not Visual Studio Code. This is actually Visual Studio, the 2019 something. And this is just very, very simple, simple class, a static class. There are two functions, a test function. You give it two ints, and it will multiply it. It will add them together. Poof. And the other one you call ping, and then it returns a pong. So let me show you. Here is a Business Central running off, and that may be hard to see, but this is running off businesscentral.dynamics.com. I can hit ping, I get a pong. I can hit cal 2 + 3. The result is 5. So at this point, trust me, the calculation is done by .NET code, and the pong was returned by the piece of .NET code. Actually, this exact piece of .NET code. So how is this done? Let me show you. A while back, Microsoft introduced something called Blazor. So Blazor is a way to basically build a web application in C#. And Blazor is a lot of things, but at the core of Blazor, there's actually a version of the .NET runtime written in JavaScript. It's actually the Mono runtime, but Mono kind of got Microsoft when Microsoft acquired Xamarin. Mono is still open source and used in a bunch of places like Unity and stuff like that. But Microsoft created a JavaScript version of Mono. And so what I thought, my idea had been for a while, and yesterday night I finally broke the last hurdle. Is that why can't I take that .NET runtime and put it inside a control add-in in Business Central and host it all inside an app, and then thereby actually getting a .NET runtime framework, .NET runtime environment running inside my browser. And so I did. So let me show you, and here is the app. This is Visual Studio Code, and I'll just stop the debugger just to time out because now we're on cloud. So what do we have here? I have a test page. That was the page we saw. I have a user control called .NET test, and I have two triggers: result. The result is %1 is D, and ping result text, message text. So these two triggers were what you saw, and they were called from two actions in the footer bar. One calling ping, and one calling, and I think here I call it calc. And if we go back here, it was actually called test function. So ping makes sense that turns into ping, but how does calc turns into test function? Let me show you. So whenever we have a control add-in, we have the control add-in file, which is this one called .NET AL. And let's start from the bottom because this has a lot of stuff. So there's a procedure called calc and ping and some events. And they call into script. And you can see the calc calls something called .NET.invoke method async testlib test function and A and B parameters. And the other ping calls into the same assembly testlib and ping. And then when we get something back, we call invoke extensibility method to send the result back to AL. So what is this? What is .NET.invoke method async? In order to understand that, we need to go back for a second and look at the add-in control file. And you saw I scrolled quickly past something. So as I scroll up here, you can see that I got a bunch of stuff. .NET framework bin Microsoft extension .option .dll, and then it says .png. We'll get back to that in a second. So this kind of, it looks like all the DLLs needed for .NET to run. And we can see that those are all right now images. And then there's a couple of scripts, one called Blazor WebAssembly.js and .NET 3.2.0 and our own script one that we have a minute ago. So this, let's actually go into it. So what happens is that the .NET engine is sitting in a couple of files. So the .NET engine, the first one is called Blazor.webassembly.js. This is kind of the bootloader. So I made it easier to read, not that it's easy to read anyway. So this is the bootloader, and the bootloader has a list of stuff that it needs. In this case, I told you that my entry assembly. So assembly is the fancy .NET word for DLL. And in this case, my assembly is the testlib, basically the one we saw just here, testlib. And then there's a bunch of DLLs that are needed. And then we have the runtime. The runtime is built out of two files, a JavaScript.NET file and what is called WebAssembly file. So this is a special version of JavaScript, so to speak. That's more like assembly code. So it's very, very fast to execute, very fast to load, and very fast, not very fast, but very optimizable. So that's basically the mono-based .NET runtime. But remember the .png. So these are DLL files, and all the files we have seen, I have added into into my control.in. So here's the .NET 3.2.0 JavaScript, and then there's the WebAssembly file. And in here in bin, actually this one is not needed, that's just something I was playing around with. So let's delete that just to avoid confusing anybody. So now we see here that here are all the DLLs. But if you remember let me go back. Sorry, there's a lot of browsing. There's no typing, but there's tons of browsing because this is so many moving components. If we go back to this one, the control.in file, it said images equal and then all these files. So the problem is that I needed to bundle some JavaScript. No problem, I can just put that in scripts. But then I need to bundle some DLL files. And I cannot put DLL files in the control.in because that's not necessarily a valid file format. It actually is, meaning that AL does not care if I put it in images, then it's just a resource somehow. So you can put anything in images. The problem becomes that at the other end, when you're actually going to serve this to a client, you need to convince the web server that are serving the files that this is a file that it can serve. It knows the type of it, so it can give the right HTTP headers and so on. And surprisingly, Microsoft's web server hosting Dynamics.com is not that interested in serving DLL files. So I needed to rename them to something that it will serve, and I chose PNG. So all the DLL files here are basically PNGs. But in order for that to work, I needed then to customize both the bootloader and the .NET engine to actually figure out that that's what it's needed. And the next problem is that Blazor thinks that it was, hosted in the standardized way, where /framework was a subfolder of the primary folder of the website. And now we're inside an iframe on a very, very remote back-ass place on the web server. So that's clearly not just after the /something. So what we needed to do, and let me show you. So in some cases in the engine, I needed to do something like this. So I needed to make sure that this is a function called getBinary_promise, where it's actually going out to find the file, and I just overwrote the fetch command to make sure that it will get the PNG file instead. Let's see if I had. That's not in here, that's in the other one. Let's go look at that one. Let's search for it. Oh, sorry, it was right there. Here we go. So the next problem is the path, because again, it wants to normally reside very close to the root. Unfortunately, Microsoft has a JavaScript function called Microsoft.dynamics.nav. And this time not invoke extensibility method, but get image resource, meaning that we can ask Business Central if we give it the name of an image inside our control.in, it will return the actual URL. And the actual URL, if we go back out here and we go behind the scene, we don't care about those two messages right now. Let's go to, I just need to do this. Let's reopen this one. .NET. Go back to this guy. You can see here, let's actually open a new tab. Wow, that's impossible to see. So let's make that, just go back here and see that this is the URL. So in this case, HTTP msca1ca something appservice.ca.businesscentral.dynamics.com tenant my tenant resources extracted resources a random number .NET framework WASM .NET WASM. So the get image resource will actually give you this part for the file. So in order for the .NET engine to actually find the resources it's looking for, you have to use this trick. And I think I'm doing that in a couple of places. And that was kind of it. So I did cheat you a bit, sorry. So this is going back to the C# thing. What I actually need to do here, and I'm just going to undo. It was just to not spoil the surprise at the beginning of the video. So we need to mark these functions JS invocable and what the name they should be invoked by, or in order for the JavaScript to find the function inside the DLLs. But other than that, this is just normal C# code. And I'm looking at the time for this video. So we could, let's just make a quick change here. So a plus b times 2. So what I'm gonna do now is that I'm gonna build this thing here. And it's building, let's build succeeded. So what I need to do now is find a command prompt, because that's how I roll. And I need to copy my testlib DLL into and overwrite the PNG file. That's done. That's not quite enough, because what also happens is that if you remember the file we had here, the bootloader telling us what to load, and we're telling it that it should load our testlib, but it also has a hash value calculated. So we need to update the hash, and I have not found a great way to do that yet. So I'm just gonna grab the that thing out of the newly generated compiled here. So I'm just gonna grab the hash value here. And I'm gonna paste it in here, and then you can see we got a new hash value, so I'm gonna delete the old one. And with that, I'm gonna not save this file with the URL in it. Then I'm gonna deploy, see if I'm lucky. Authentication, no, I need to authenticate. That seems to happen to me all the time. I'm not on the whitelist of what Microsoft's doing, so they want to have me authenticating over and over. Anyway, so deploying to the cloud takes a bit, because this is not a small extension anymore. As you can see, we have a complete .NET runtime environment here. Since I'm not using HTTP, I'm not using IO compression, I'm not using tons of stuff here. I could shave this down to being just the assemblies I need in order to speed up the functionality. But what I have right now is actually a complete system, so I could deploy almost any piece of .NET code, as long as so let's talk about that for a second. Any piece of .NET code. So this has to be a .NET standard thing. And if I try to access something like load a file or do something that is going outside of the sandbox of the browser, that wouldn't work. So we're still confined into the sandbox of the browser. And I think this thing is still deploying. Takes a second here. 2 seconds perhaps. So while that is deploying, let's talk about, is this just a stupid hacker trick, or could this actually be used for something useful? And okay, let's hit calc. And the result is 10. So our update worked. Excellent. Okay, so back to the discussion. Is this useful or not? So think about it. You're running from your, in this case, something with 8 cores and stuff like that. You have a lot of power on your desktop, and you're just browsing. So being able to use the client's own machine for processing, I think, is just as valid as calling out to a Azure function or something like that. So in this case, you can just use the client to host image operation or calculation, stuff like that. And .NET in the browser is actually pretty awesome. So I think this could actually be way more useful than when I started out on this little hacker project. And I can certainly see some of this actually being used in not necessarily in some of our current products, but it could be used in future products. While I was doing this, several ideas actually came, and I think this works way better than you would imagine it would. So with that, I will put this on my GitHub. You can find the link to the source code down below, so you can play with it around. I think I'm going to make a couple more videos, maybe trying something useful with this. But until then, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and if you want to see more videos like this, put a comment down below. Also comment if you have an idea of what you could use this for, and do try the source and see if you can break it. With that, have a wonderful day. Cheers.